is up? Hopefully you guys are having a wonderful day. Back with some more Resident Evil 5 gameplay for you. And today I'm going to be talking about a question I asked on my channel just recently, and that is about, is Chris Redfield overhated? And you may be wondering, well, where did I come up with this? And as I've been online for the last few months, obviously heavily involved with Resident Evil, one of the things that I've heard a lot of people say over the past half year or year or so is that how much they get tired of Chris or sick and tired of seeing Chris, and it just seems like a lot of people have a lot of hatred towards Chris. Not that there's not fans of Chris, but it just seems like more people constantly dog on Chris. And in my honest opinion, I feel like a lot of that is misplaced hatred. Like there's a lot of just things that are getting put on Chris. And once again, I'm not the craziest Chris fan, but I do respect him. He's an iconic, and he is a great character of the Resident Evil franchise, and he's a big part of why Resident Evil is where it is today. I mean, we do need Chris. I mean, I've never been somebody that's always put down the character in the sense of propping up other characters. I'm not that type of person. But to me, I just feel like a lot of people dog on Chris a lot, and I feel like that dogging on just comes out of a sense of just, misplaced sense of hatred. But why do I feel this way, and why do I feel like a lot of people misplaced their hatred towards Chris? One of the biggest things I hear with Chris is that, he's, I guess, overexposed. He's in everything. I see him in everything. And yes, I was recently reading a little post a couple days ago where they're talking about all the major Resident Evil characters and all the game appearances they have in major releases. Not just major releases, but also spin-offs. And he was obviously number one. And it is also true that Chris Redfield has been in every single major release since Resident Evil 5, meaning 5, 6, 7, and Village. That is true. But also understanding context, I think, is also very important. Because while that is true, he's been in 5, 6, 7, and Village, you got to look at also how he's used. Now, yes, you haven't seen other characters, like you haven't seen Leon since 6, you haven't seen Ada since 6, you haven't seen Jill since 5, and you haven't seen Claire since Revelations 2. And I'm just sticking with the games in this sense, not the movies. But, yeah, you haven't seen them. But let's stop acting like, oh, my God, Chris has been used and, he's had these lengthy appearances and stuff. He hasn't had a full... In fact, the funny part is, if you count the remakes, Chris is actually the major character of all the major characters who hasn't had at least a decent lengthy campaign since Resident Evil 6. So it's been over a decade, because all the other games that's come out since then, that he's appeared in terms of new games like 7, he's barely, no one talks about Chris in Resident Evil 7. There's a obvious reason for that, because a lot of people still couldn't figure out that was really Chris at the end of Resident Evil 7. He's barely in there, and I know he had the Not a Hero DLC. That's like the lengthiest thing he's had, but do you really call that like a full-length campaign? No, it's a little side thing they gave him to do, and he appeared in a little bit of the other DLC stuff, but that's probably his most lengthiest thing he's had. And then in Village, while he is on the cover of the game, implying that he's a major part, I wouldn't really call him a huge major part. I mean, he's barely in the game, once again, in terms of the main game, and he just had this short playable part, there's a big thing going down with him, but that's more at the end of the game. It's not like it's happening during the game, but the point I'm trying to make here is that Chris really... He hasn't had a full-length campaign since Resident Evil 6, and that came out in 2012. So the point I'm trying to make here is that it's been a long time since Chris really was in a huge section and has a huge playable major character in a Resident Evil, because he hasn't been in any of the recent remakes in 2, 3, and 4. So it's ironic that, he's been in these things more than any other Resident Evil character, but once again, it's not necessarily how many times you're in it, it's how many times you're used, because the other characters haven't been seen since post Resident Evil 6, but it's not like Chris is being overused. Like these games, 7 and Village, they are Ethan games 90+% of the time, with short sections of me and Chris, but that's it. Another thing I think he gets overhated from is obviously from his character standpoint, is that a lot of people always like to put up the thing that he's not the most interesting character, or sometimes he gets to a point where they don't like how he's acting in terms of post, Resident Evil 5, in terms of 6, and I've gotten to my point in Resident Evil 6 where I don't hate necessarily how he acts. I just feel like that whole story, and I've made videos about it in the past, that should have been pushed to Resident Evil 5. Like, if they ever get to the point of remaking Resident Evil 5, I feel like that whole storyline in Resident Evil 6, him being really, with the PTSD or overly upset like that, I feel like that should have been used in Resident Evil 5 towards, Jill, ironically, because that would have been a lot more emotional of an impact instead of doing it with a bunch of unnamed soldiers that, to be honest, I really could care less about compared to an iconic character and how it was going to 5. But that's another story for another day. But obviously, a lot of people weren't a big fan of him in Village, and I actually like what they set up in Village. But ultimately, it's the payoff of what they're going to do, or if they're going to do it at all. My point being is that I'm interested to see where it goes. But I also stress that once again, I feel like Chris obviously has to be used really. He has to be one of the major playable characters, not just for short segments, but an actual main character, playable character in the next Resident Evil. I've stressed that in Resident Evil 9. I just feel like you got to go with the OG characters. I would like, obviously, my dream scenario would probably be him and Jill, because it is a BSAA related operation going on here with them going rogue, and you have to have, ironically, the members who kind of made the BSAA where they are, put them on the map in the first place. But you can't do that if you have Chris used barely or kind of used off and on. It just wouldn't make sense. Have him used strongly. And I also liked them to finally show the ultimate landmine, and which led Chris to his ultimate distrust and dissension from the BSAA, because even before the end of Village, he had a lot of distrust before we saw him using BOW. So that would add to a lot of depth in Chris' character and what led him to feeling that way, so we can understand why he was that way. So that's something they definitely need to show sometime in 9. What was the ultimate start of this, and how we can better understand Chris's actions. And I just feel like, the hatred of him and how he's used and what they're using for, that's not something that I would put on Chris. I think it's got to be something put on Capcom themselves. You got to use him properly. As I said, he's been in all these games, but he hasn't been used in a way that makes you think, oh yeah, he's been used great. Yeah, other characters haven't been seen, but it's not like he's getting full-length campaigns and he's getting the greatest moments ever. He's just kind of there, and that's been the case the last 2 games. And I think now more than ever, you really want to have him used strong. And I feel like, bringing him and Jill back, 2 of the OGs from the first Resident Evil, and having them team up, I think that would just be a perfect solution, a perfect remedy. Because obviously people want to see Jill come back, and having Chris come back, the original duo, and have him come back strongly and well developed and have great moments, especially with the BSAA being personal. I think it has a great opportunity to get rid of a lot of the hatred and show that, hey, you can use a lot of characters and have them used very strongly. But that's my opinion. I want to hear your guys' opinion. Do you one of those people that overhate Chris, or you think he's overhated? What's your opinion? Let me know down in the comment section down below. But thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you did enjoy this video. Hopefully I see you guys back in the next one. Thanks, and I'll see you all later. Peace.